give you guys a couple of extra little graphic organizers to use when you're studying for your test on Mesopotamia and Egypt. If you have your study charts in front of you, the one that we already went over with Mesopotamia before you had your big quiz, and the one on Egypt that we were working on putting together last week in class, then this should be pretty easy. Now, what we've got started here up on the board is a Venn diagram with Mesopotamia on the left and Egypt on the right. I always tend to go left to right in order that we study things because that's how most of us read. All right, now, if we wanted to just start throwing information up here very kind of disorganized and haphazard, we definitely could. But if you want to make this easier on yourself while you study, you probably want to be a little more organized about how you go about it. So what I do with a Venn diagram is split it into rows going across, and then it's much easier to see the similarities and differences between civilizations like this. So we take your basic Venn diagram, and let's start with our first section. Okay? And we can deal with geography. Now, if this was a big sheet of paper out to the side, I'd probably have this labeled. It's going to be a little smushed up here just because we're working with the size of the board. All right. So, with a Venn diagram, the overlap in the middle is the things that they have in common. Because in the middle, you've got information that's in both circles. So, what do they have in common in terms of geography? Well, they're both river valley civilizations. Earliest civilizations, we see them develop next to rivers, along rivers, adjacent to rivers. They have rivers because people have to be able to farm. So that's definitely a feature that they have in common. Okay, so we can put rivers right here. Okay. Now, what's significantly different about their geography? And this is what we'll put in the circles that don't overlap. This area is just Mesopotamia. This area over here is just Egypt. So, in terms of geography of Mesopotamia, one of the things that is different from Egypt is that they had no natural barriers. It was very easy for people to invade. In order to protect the cities, they built walls around the cities, and we've talked about that before. In Egypt, however, to the eastern side and the western side of the Nile, they have deserts. Okay. East and west of the Nile. Those are their natural barriers because in the ancient world it would have been very difficult to cross the desert to try to invade Egypt, and pretty much nobody does that. They do get invaded after the Middle Kingdom, end of the New Kingdom, but those are people coming across the water, and that happens a lot later. All right, what's something else that they do not have in common? Well, in terms of the rivers, obviously, they're both river valley civilizations. But in Mesopotamia, the Tigris and Euphrates were very unpredictable. People didn't know exactly when they were going to flood, how bad the flooding was going to be. They had a lot of, devastating floods that would wipe out villages, or waters that were too low and they'd have a drought. So we can squeeze that in here. Whoops. Let's see. Unpredictable floods. That almost fit. Okay? In contrast, or something that would be different over here, trying to keep this balanced, would be that in Egypt, the Nile was very predictable in terms of flooding. So they had very predictable floods. The Nile was very regular. People could pretty much know what to expect from year to year in terms of how big the floodwaters were, how much silt would get washed out of the river, and their calendars were really reliable for that kind of thing. All right, so that's our geography. Now, the next level that we can put here, if we're talking about, keeping this nice, balanced system, keeping everything in easy-to-read rows going across, is probably government. Okay? And this is another one I'm going to have to kind of squeeze in on the side over here. All right? So, what do they both have in common? Early in Mesopotamian history, their governments are theocracies. And we know throughout ancient Egypt's history, the governments are theocracies because each of the pharaohs is also the leader of the religion, and the pharaoh is supposed to be worshipped as a god on earth. So we have two different types of theocracies, but they're still both theocracies. So, in terms of the difference, Mesopotamia, early government, controlled by priests. I'm going to get a little smushed. Okay? Early government controlled by priests. And on the Egypt side, we have the government controlled by the pharaoh, who is a god on earth. Okay? What's another similarity that we can pinpoint about these two systems? Not only are they both theocracies, different types, but they're both governments run by religious leaders, but we can also say that the rulers established dynastic power, or they had dynasties, where you have a father and then the power goes to his son and then to his son and kind of down the family line. So we can put that in here too. And those are both on your vocab list. Theocracy and dynasty are both terms that you want to know before we get to the test this week. All right. You might also notice that I'm doing these in different colors. That's another visual cue when you go to study, that all of the information in the same color is related.